Hey everyone, my name is Vedant, and on behalf of my co-authors from Georgia Tech, I'm going to be presenting our work on modeling organizational culture with workplace experiences shared on Glassdoor. In an organization, there are certain norms and perceptions which affect how they develop new ideas and also manage unanticipated events. This unique value system is often referred to as organizational culture. Organizational culture is important not only because it describes company outcomes like revenue, but also because it explains employee behavior. In fact, factors like employee loyalty and commitment are related to organizational culture, and that's why we need to develop a better understanding of it. Traditionally, organizational culture has always been very difficult to describe. It's a fairly ambiguous term, and many different researchers in organizational studies have tried to describe it in their own way, using several different frameworks. And these frameworks would use different dimensions to explain what organizational culture is made of. For example, some dimensions could be like the power distance in an organization, but at the same time, other frameworks could be looking at things like individualism versus collectivism. Typically, researchers would take these frameworks, build instruments, which would be surveys, and to render an empirical illustration of a company's organization culture, they would conduct surveys. But the workplace settings is not exactly the most conducive to get great quality of data from surveys. Because not everyone wants to respond to a survey when they're anxious about how their opinion could possibly affect their position in the company and how it can come back to bite them in a review. Given the ecology of the workplace, these surveys rarely scale to comprehensively describe everyone in the workplace. Because it's limited by biases, in order to leverage everyone's voice, we need to look at other approaches that are different from static survey methods which only capture a snapshot of data. So, in order to mitigate all those challenges, in this work, we study the potential of crowd-contributed employee experiences in the workplace as a means to understand organizational culture. One such platform that aggregates employee opinion is Glassdoor. Unlike surveys, in these approaches, employees can maintain complete anonymity while sharing their experiences. Also, these posts are self-initiated and allow users to express their experiences with the richness of language. But as we already mentioned, organizational culture is quite a complex phenomenon to understand, and it has multiple dimensions. So, in this study, our first aim is to operationalize it, keeping together all its multidimensional aspects and validate it with the language on Glassdoor. First, I'm going to describe the data we use for this segment of the work and also where we source that data from, as well as why that's important for our study. To examine if Glassdoor reviews can actually describe organizational culture, we begin with the reviews of the top 100 companies in the Fortune 500 list. This is a list compiled and ranked by revenue for 2019. We take this approach mostly to get a voluminous set of data where we have enough reviews from each company. Through this approach, we collect over 600,000 Glassdoor reviews posted on these pages. Once we've obtained the data from Glassdoor, we set off to establish an ontology that can characterize organizational culture through text. For this, we refer to ONET, a database of various job descriptors. This was developed under the sponsorship of the US Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration. But ONET in itself has a lot of job descriptors, not all of which are relevant to organizational culture. Because of which we refer to 4 frameworks from the literature in organizational studies that have actually described organizational culture with various different dimensions. By referring to these dimensions, we narrow down 41 job descriptors that describe organizational culture in some of its known dimensions from the literature. And these are segregated into 7 categories by ONET, and that is what you can see on the slide right now. Now in the next few slides, I'm going to explain how we use those 41 job descriptors to actually operationalize organizational culture, and also how we use the Glassdoor data to actually get some validity of this construct. So without going into too much detail, what we essentially do is take all these 41 descriptors, each of which is a sentence or a few sentences of expressive rich text, and we turn those into word embeddings. And with those word embeddings, which are essentially vectors, we can now develop this 41 dimensional vector that represents organizational culture. And it is effectively capturing the meaning of organizational culture in a lexicosemantic space. In order to gain the face validity for our construct, what we now do is represent these Glassdoor reviews as word embeddings as well. So now they're also in a vector space, very similar to what the construct is. By doing this, we can actually understand the distance between these reviews and each of the different dimensions in our construct. For example, you can see on the slide, there is a review which spoke about a lot of group work makes the work easier and more fun. And from our data, it was apparent that this is closest to the dimension of independence. And similarly, we have another example on the slide here, which is more closer to the dimension of coaching and developing others. As you can see from the post itself, it talks about senior management as well as an interest in helping people succeed. So by using this methodology, we can actually describe what a crowd-contributed, self-initiated post is actually talking about. Another way we try to understand the validity of our construct is to gain some understanding of the importance of certain n-grams for each dimension. Just to give you a few examples, take the n-gram for team members. The n-gram for team members shows the highest importance within the descriptors for interacting with others. Similarly, when you take the n-grams of job security, you see that to be more important in the categories of interpersonal relationships. It's not specifically illustrated here, but the dimension it's most important in is conflict situations. And similarly, you can look at a lot of different n-grams, and it does tie into the literature about what people are talking about and how that actually affects the work culture. So in this way, we get quite some confidence that organizational culture can be depicted with language and this 41-dimensional vector that we have constructed. So up until now, I've shown that our construct of organizational culture, the 41 dimensions we that do capture, is actually useful in distinguishing what a post is talking about. So given an experience that is shared on a crowd contributed platform like Glassdoor, we can actually get some idea of which dimension of organizational culture it's truly representing. And by this, we can actually scale it to a large set of reviews and can actually get some understanding of the signature of a company. But now the real question is, does this really matter? And whether organizational culture that we are capturing through this model, can that actually explain something about the employee and the individual functioning at a workplace? So that takes us to our second aim. In aim 2, we're now going to focus on a limited set of data, specifically belonging to companies where we could actually obtain employee level performance information. For this, we obtained the data collected in the Desiree project. This is a large-scale and longitudinal multi-sensor project that broadly aims to passively understand employee well-being and performance. In this, we obtained the data for 341 employees across 3 different companies, all of which are in the United States, and all these employees are involved in information work. As a part of this project, the participants answered validated surveys on individual differences, including demographics, job characteristics, executive function, and personality traits. All of these variables are going to be used as controls for the rest of the study. These participants also provided self-reported assessments of job performance, particularly the in-role behavior, which is a measure of task performance, as well as organizational citizenship behavior, which is seen as a measure of contextual performance or extra role activities which the company does not formally define. One thing that we do know about organizational culture is that it is something that is collectively experienced as well as collectively manifested. So in the Tesseray dataset, this can be further stratified by sectors like management, business and finance, computers, and mathematics. Without going into too much detail of the mathematical modeling, we have a visualization here which is showing how organizational culture and its specific dimensions differ between different sectors of different cohorts. Each rectangle that you see here represents one of the cohorts in the Tesseray dataset. And on the x-axis are the different dimensions that our construct can actually capture. So the color intensity is actually showing whether that particular dimension was spoken about in the pros section of the Glassdoor review or the cons section of the Glassdoor review. So simple way of understanding it is whether a particular aspect of the organizational culture was considered favorably or unfavorably. We know that human behaviors are affected by the complex interplay between an individual and the culture they're embedded within. In our particular setting, we hypothesize that our modeling of organizational culture explains the job performance of employees over and beyond what we can tell from just individual differences. Specifically, to understand the relationship of organizational culture with employee performance, we built a model where we include variables like the demographics, job characteristics, executive functions, and personality traits, but we also include a 41-dimensional vector depicting the culture for that particular organizational sector. And then we build different models, one to explain in-role behavior and another one for organizational citizenship behavior. So one of the benchmark models is only built on the individual attributes, and another one includes the individual attributes as well as ratings. So what do we find? In both IRB as well as OCB, so in both task performance as well as citizenship behavior, we find that the model that includes organizational culture is actually a better model. Quantifying organizational culture this way can actually mitigate the limitations of traditional surveys. We can now use crowd-contributed platforms as a new approach to understand organizational culture dynamically. One thing that our work is trying to showcase is that it is possible for employees, both existing as well as prospective ones, to try to understand how it is like working in a company in a more quantified way. At the same time, employers can also ask questions about how healthy is the culture there? Is the culture actually supporting work-life balance? Is the culture something that is fostering creativity, or is it only concentrating on productivity? We would also like to highlight some of the ethical implications of our work. Anonymous online platforms like Glassdoor are not immune to bad behaviors on the internet. These crowd-contributed platforms are rife with problems of review fraud. Organizations can abuse these approaches to selectively manipulate information and change the perception of their company. And this could actually jeopardize employee agency and rights. So in conclusion, we have examined organization culture by using employee-contributed workplace experiences, and by adopting the word embedding-based approaches, we operationalize organization culture in 41 dimensions. Our approach of modeling organizational culture also explains employee performance above and beyond what can only be gleaned from individual difference variables. With that, I would like to thank you all for listening. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us at the email IDs listed on the screen. Definitely go and take a look at the paper for a more in-depth understanding of the methodology used, as well as our discussion around the implications and the ethical considerations for our work.